When I first heard the theory that Area 51 was just a smokescreen, I laughed it off like anyone else would. Aliens, secret tech, government experiments. It's all part of the myth, right? But then I got involved. Not willingly, mind you. It started with a research trip to the Arctic. Just another job, or so I thought. The North Pole was supposed to be desolate, nothing but ice and wind. But what we found buried beneath the surface? It wasn't just shocking. It made Area 51 look like child's play. And trust me, once you know the truth, there's no going back. For me, it all started 6 months ago. I'd been living a quiet life in a sleepy Nevada town, the kind of place people drive through without even stopping for gas. I worked from home, writing dry technical manuals for companies I didn't care about. My nights were spent binge-watching old documentaries or scrolling aimlessly through conspiracy forums, purely for entertainment. At least that's what I told myself. But one night something caught my eye. It was a blurry satellite image posted by a user named IceHunter77. The photo showed a section of the Arctic Circle, but there was something off. A circular shadow beneath the ice, perfectly symmetrical, spanning several miles. "This is no natural formation," the caption read. Most people in the thread dismissed it as fake, but something about it stuck with me. I couldn't explain why, but I saved the image anyway. That should have been the end of it. Just another weird rabbit hole to forget about by morning. But 3 days later, my life changed forever. It was just past midnight when I heard the first sound. A low hum, almost imperceptible, like a distant generator. At first, I thought it was coming from my neighbors, but as I got up and walked to the window, I realized it wasn't coming from outside. It was inside the house. My laptop screen glowed faintly on my desk. I'd left it in sleep mode, but now it was awake, flickering. Lines of code raced across the screen, faster than I could follow. Then, just as suddenly as it started, the screen went black. I stood there frozen, my breath caught in my throat. A single message popped up, stark white against the darkness. "Stop asking questions." I didn't even know what questions I was asking. My hands trembled as I slammed the lid shut and unplugged the computer, but the damage was already done. The next day, I decided to forget about the whole thing. It was probably just some elaborate hack, I told myself. A prank, maybe. But part of me wasn't convinced. I tried to go about my day, but everywhere I went, I felt watched. And then the knock started. It was 2:17 a.m. when I first heard it. 3 sharp raps at the door, loud enough to jolt me upright in bed. My heart pounded as I crept down the hallway, every instinct screaming at me to stay put. But curiosity won out. I peeked through the peephole, expecting to see a cop or maybe some drunk who had the wrong house. Instead, there was nothing, just the empty street, bathed in the pale glow of a flickering streetlight. I waited a full minute before opening the door. Cold air rushed in, sending a shiver down my spine. On the porch was a small unmarked envelope. No address, no name, just my house, my door. Against my better judgment, I picked it up and tore it open. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded twice. The handwriting was jagged, almost frantic. "It's not Area 51. It's the North Pole. They're lying to you. Don't stop digging." That was all it said. No signature, no explanation. I should have thrown it away right then and there, pretended none of this ever happened. But instead, I read the note over and over again, the words burning into my mind. By morning, I couldn't think about anything else. Who left the note? What did they mean by "don't stop digging"? And why the North Pole? I had no answers, but I felt like I'd been handed a piece of a puzzle I didn't even know I was trying to solve. I spent the next few days combing through everything I could find about the Arctic Circle, satellite images, old expedition logs, even myths and folklore. It was a strange mix of fact and fiction, but one story stood out. In 1947, a group of Norwegian fishermen claimed to have seen lights beneath the ice during a routine trip north. They described it as a glowing, pulsating sphere that vanished as quickly as it appeared. The official explanation? A natural gas release. But the fishermen swore it was something else, something alive. Then there were the anomalies. Satellite data showed unusually high temperatures in certain parts of the Arctic, isolated pockets where the ice was melting faster than it should. Scientists chalked it up to climate change, but the patterns didn't match. They weren't random. They were precise. That shadow in the photo from Ice Hunter 77. The more I stared at it, the more certain I became. It wasn't a natural formation. It looked manufactured. That's when the emails started. They came from an anonymous sender. No name, no subject line, just a string of numbers in the address. At first, they were just links to obscure articles about the Arctic, but then they got personal. One message read, "We know you've seen it. The shadow, it's not what you think." Another, "Meet me. Midnight. Abandoned gas station outside of town. Come alone." It was insane, dangerous even, but by this point I was too deep to back out. Something about this felt bigger than me, bigger than anything I could explain. I had to know the truth. So that night I drove out to the gas station. The place had been closed for years, its windows boarded up, and its sign barely hanging on by rusted bolts. My headlights cut through the darkness, but there was no one there. Just me and the hum of the engine. I sat there for a while, second-guessing everything. Maybe this was a trap. Maybe I was about to be dragged into something I'd regret for the rest of my life. And then I saw them. A figure stepped out from the shadows, dressed in a heavy parka, with the hood pulled low. They approached slowly, deliberately, and stopped just outside the beam of my headlights. I rolled down the window, my pulse racing. "Who are you?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. The figure didn't answer right away. Instead, they held up a small, weathered notebook and handed it to me through the window. "Everything you need to know," they said, their voice muffled by the wind. "But once you start, there's no turning back." And just like that, they vanished into the night. I sat there clutching the notebook, feeling the weight of what I'd just stepped into. I didn't know it yet, but this was the beginning of a journey that would take me to the most remote place on Earth and uncover secrets that had been buried for centuries. But that's just the start. Because what I found in that notebook, it changed everything. It wasn't just information, it was a warning. The pages were filled with fragmented details, strange symbols, and half-deciphered messages from people who clearly knew too much. One entry caught my attention right away. "You are not the first to uncover this. And if you are reading this, you won't be the last. But be warned, they are watching, always." I had no idea who they were, but whoever wrote that seemed certain I'd already crossed some invisible line. The deeper I read, the more uneasy I felt. The notebook wasn't just a collection of stories or theories. It was a record, a blueprint for something that felt way too real to dismiss. The coordinates at the back were burned into my mind, but I wasn't ready to look at them yet. Not until I understood what I was walking into. I started with the photo, the structure in the ice. It haunted me. I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd seen something like it before, even though I knew I hadn't. There was a weight to it, a presence, as though it wasn't just a building, but something alive. The symbols etched into its surface weren't like any language I'd seen, but they stirred something familiar in the back of my mind. An itch I couldn't scratch. I flipped through the notebook again, scanning for anything that might explain the photo. That's when I noticed an entry scrawled in a frantic hand, the ink smeared as if it had been written in a hurry. "It's not a building, it's a door." A door. To what? The words hung in my mind, heavy and impossible to shake. I kept reading, hoping for clarity, but instead, I found something worse. They've tried to open it before. Every time the results are catastrophic. 1949, 1961, 1987. All failed. Too dangerous. Too unstable. Below that was a list of names, 15 in total, each followed by the same word, MIA, missing in action. I leaned back in my chair, my pulse racing. Whatever this thing was, this door, it wasn't just dangerous, it was deadly. And yet, I couldn't stop myself from being drawn to it. That single word, proof, written next to the coordinates, was like a hook in my brain. By the time I finally worked up the courage to type the numbers into my computer, my hands were shaking. The coordinates pointed to a location deep within the Arctic Circle, hundreds of miles from any known settlement, a place so remote that satellite images were blurry at best. But there was something strange about the map. The area around the coordinates was blank. No topography, no markings, just an empty white void. It didn't make sense. Even in the most remote parts of the world, you'd expect some detail. It was as if someone had deliberately erased whatever was there. I stared at the screen, the silence of the room pressing down on me. Every instinct I had was screaming at me to walk away, to pretend I'd never seen the notebook or the photo or the coordinates. But it was too late for that. I was in too deep, and part of me didn't want to stop. That's when I made the decision. I didn't just want to know the truth. I needed to see it for myself. The next few days were a blur. I cashed in every favor I had and burned through my savings, trying to piece together a plan. Getting to the Arctic Circle wasn't something you could do on a whim. I'd need a guide, equipment, transportation, all of it expensive and hard to come by. Eventually, I found Eric, a Norwegian bush pilot who specialized in unusual requests, as he called them. When I showed him the coordinates, his reaction was exactly what I expected. "You're out of your mind," he said, leaning back in his chair and crossing his arms. "Probably," I admitted, sliding a stack of cash across the table. "But I'm serious." He eyed the money, then me. "You know what's up there?" "No," I said honestly, "but I need to find out." Eric sighed, rubbing a hand over his weathered face. "You're not the first person to go looking for something in the ice, you know. Most of them don't come back." That gave me pause. "What do you mean, most of them?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached into a drawer and pulled out a crumpled map. He spread it across the table, tracing a finger over a section of the Arctic Circle. "Here," he said, tapping the paper. "A few years ago, a research team went missing in this area. No distress signal, no wreckage. Just gone. The locals call it the dead zone." I stared at the map, the weight of his words sinking in. "And you're still willing to take me there?" "For the right price," he said with a shrug. "But don't say I didn't warn you." 2 weeks later, I was standing on a frozen airstrip in northern Norway, dressed in layers of thermal gear that made me feel like a marshmallow. Eric's plane was a battered old thing, more patchwork than machine, but it was all we had. As we took off, the world below us turned into a sea of endless white. There was something unsettling about the vastness of it, the way it stretched on forever without a single sign of life. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional crackle of the radio. Eric was focused on the controls, his face set in a grim expression. When we finally neared the coordinates, he turned to me, his voice low. "You sure about this?" Last chance to turn back. I nodded, even though my stomach was in knots. "I'm sure." He didn't say anything else, just adjusted the controls and began our descent. As the plane dipped lower, I caught my first glimpse of the area, and my blood ran cold. The ice below us wasn't smooth and untouched like the rest of the Arctic. It was fractured, jagged, as if something massive had pushed its way up from beneath. And at the center of it all, I saw it. A dark, circular shadow beneath the ice, just like the photo in the notebook. Whatever it wasn't natural. Eric landed the plane on a relatively flat patch of ice a few miles from the site, the tires skidding slightly before coming to a stop. He killed the engine and turned to me. "This is as far as I go," he said. "If you're smart, you'll leave it alone." But I wasn't feeling particularly smart. I grabbed my pack, stepped out into the biting cold, and began my trek toward the shadow. The wind howled around me, whipping snow across my face and making it hard to see more than a few feet ahead. But I pressed on, driven by a mix of fear and determination. When I finally reached the edge of the shadow, I realized just how massive it was. The thing beneath the ice wasn't just big, it was colossal. And as I stood there staring down into the darkness, I felt something I hadn't expected. A low, rhythmic hum, vibrating through the ice and up into my boots. It was alive. I froze, unable to process what I was feeling. The hum was subtle at first, almost like a distant heartbeat, but it grew stronger the longer I stood there, thrumming through the frozen ground beneath my feet. It wasn't just a sound, it was a sensation, a vibration that seemed to sync with my own pulse. My instinct screamed at me to back away, But my curiosity was louder. The shadow beneath the ice stretched out in every direction, its edges fading into the whiteness of the Arctic tundra. Whatever this thing was, it had been here for centuries, maybe longer. The surface of the ice above it shimmered faintly, as if the sunlight couldn't quite penetrate its depths. I knelt down, brushing away loose snow with my gloved hand. The ice was unnaturally smooth, like glass. Peering closer, I could make out faint details of the structure below. Geometric patterns etched into its surface, intricate and alien. Symbols spiraled outward in a pattern too precise to be natural. It looked like the designs weren't carved but grown, organic yet mechanical. I reached out and pressed my hand against the ice, desperate to feel some connection to this impossible thing. The second my fingers made contact, the hum intensified. It wasn't just beneath me anymore. It was inside me, rattling my bones, pounding in my chest. My vision blurred for a moment, and a sharp ringing filled my ears. And then, just as suddenly, it stopped. The silence that followed was deafening, the kind that makes you hyper-aware of every breath, every beat of your heart. I stumbled backward, gasping for air as the world snapped back into focus. And that's when I noticed it, a hairline crack spreading out from where my hand had touched the ice. "Oh no," I muttered, my voice barely audible over the howling wind. The crack deepened, spiderwebbing outward at an alarming rate. I scrambled to my feet, unsure whether to run or stay put. But before I could decide, the ground beneath me began to shift. It wasn't like the ice was breaking apart, it was moving, as though something beneath it was waking up. The hum returned, louder this time, vibrating through the air and drowning out the wind. I could feel it in my teeth, in my skull. Whatever this thing was, it knew I was here. A sudden burst of light erupted from the center of the shadow, piercing through the ice and blinding me. I threw up my arm to shield my eyes, stumbling backward as the ground trembled violently. The light wasn't just bright, it was warm, too warm for the freezing Arctic air. When I finally dared to lower my arm, what I saw left me breathless. The ice at the center of the shadow had melted away, revealing the object below in startling clarity. It was massive, far larger than I'd imagined. A metallic dome the size of a stadium, its surface shimmering with an iridescent glow. The patterns I'd seen before were now pulsing with light, shifting and changing as if they were alive. For a moment I was struck with awe. Whatever this was, it wasn't human. It couldn't be. The craftsmanship, the sheer scale of it, it was something beyond us, something ancient and otherworldly. But then I saw the opening. A jagged seam had appeared near the top of the dome, splitting open like the petals of a flower. Inside was darkness, deep and impenetrable. But I could feel it. Something was stirring in there, something waiting. And then I heard it. A voice. It wasn't a sound exactly, more like a thought that wasn't my own, pressing into my mind with an alien force. The words were fragmented, disjointed, but they carried a sense of urgency. "You're not supposed to be here." My breath caught in my throat. "Who's there?" I whispered, the words barely audible over the pounding in my chest. There was no reply, but the sensation intensified, flooding my mind with images. Flashes of landscapes I didn't recognize, structures that defied the laws of physics, and skies filled with strange, pulsating lights. Each image came with a surge of emotion, fear, anger, desperation. And then, just as quickly as it had started, it stopped. I staggered backward, clutching my head as the weight of it all threatened to overwhelm me. My vision swam, and I fell to my knees, gasping for air. The light from the dome began to dim, and the hum quieted, retreating back into the depths of the structure. For a moment, I thought it was over, but then I heard the sound of footsteps crunching through the snow behind me. I whipped around, my heart leaping into my throat. A figure emerged from the storm, their silhouette barely visible through the swirling snow. They moved with purpose, each step deliberate, as if they'd been following me all along. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice cracking. "Who's there?" The figure stepped closer, and I finally got a good look at them. It was a man dressed in heavy Arctic gear similar to mine, his face obscured by a hood and goggles. He carried a rifle slung over one shoulder and a device in his hand that looked like some kind of scanner. "Who are you?" I demanded, trying to steady my voice. The man didn't answer. Instead, he raised the scanner, and a faint beep echoed in the air. He looked at the device, then at me, and finally spoke. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice low and gravelly. "Who are you?" I repeated, taking a step back. "Are you following me?" "I'm here to clean up your mess," he said flatly, gesturing toward the dome. "Do you have any idea what you've done?" I stared at him, dumbfounded. "I didn't do anything. You touched it," he interrupted, his tone sharp. "That's enough. You triggered the activation sequence." My blood ran cold. "Activation sequence? What are you talking about?" He sighed, lowering the scanner. "You've woken it up, and now we've got a problem." "What is it?" I asked, my voice rising with panic. "What's down there?" The man hesitated, glancing at the dome as if weighing how much he should tell me. Finally, he said, "It's a containment unit, or at least it was supposed to be. What's inside? Let's just say it's not something you want getting out." A chill ran down my spine, and it had nothing to do with the cold. "What's inside?" I pressed. He didn't answer, instead pulling out a small device that looked like a detonator. "We don't have time for this. If we don't neutralize it now, we're all screwed." "Neutralize it? How?" Before he could reply, the ground beneath us shook violently, nearly knocking us off our feet. The hum from the dome returned, louder and more insistent than before. The man cursed under his breath. Too late. I looked back at the dome, and my heart sank. The opening at the top was widening, and a dark, swirling mist was pouring out, twisting and writhing like it was alive. The symbols on the dome flared with light, casting eerie shadows across the snow. "Run!" the man said, his voice tight with fear. "What?" "Run!" he shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me away. We sprinted across the ice, the wind whipping around us as the hum grew louder and louder. Behind us, the mist began to spread, dark tendrils snaking out in every direction. As we ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't just some ancient machine or alien artifact. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just waking up. It was coming alive. The mist was faster than I expected, alive in a way that defied logic. It twisted and coiled across the ice like a living entity, driven by some unseen intelligence. I glanced back and immediately regretted it. The tendrils weren't just spreading, they were searching. They stretched toward us, pulsing with an eerie light, as though they could sense us, track us. "Don't look back," the man shouted, his voice barely audible over the deafening hum. "Just run." But I couldn't help myself. Something about the mist drew my gaze, like it was calling to me. For a brief moment, I felt an overwhelming urge to stop, to turn around and let it reach me. My legs faltered, the world narrowing to that dark, swirling mass. "Keep moving," the man barked, grabbing my arm and yanking me forward. The sudden jolt snapped me out of the trance, and I stumbled after him, my heart pounding. "What the hell is it?" I gasped, struggling to keep up. "Not here," he said, his tone urgent. "I'll explain once we're safe." Safe. The word felt meaningless out here, in this frozen wasteland with an ancient, unknowable force bearing down on us. But I had no choice but to follow him. He seemed to know more about this thing, this door, this creature, than I ever could. We ran for what felt like an eternity, the cold air burning my lungs and the weight of my gear slowing me down. The man, however, moved with purpose, like he'd done this 100 times before. He led us toward a jagged ridge of ice, the mist creeping closer with every step. "There!" he shouted, pointing toward a narrow crevasse in the ice. "We can take cover." I didn't argue. The mist was almost upon us, its tendrils snapping at our heels like predatory vines. The hum was deafening now, a constant vibration that seemed to shake the very ground beneath us. We dove into the crevasse, the walls of ice pressing close on either side. The man motioned for me to stay low as he pulled something from his pack, a small cylindrical device with a blinking light. He planted it at the entrance of the crevasse and pressed a button. A high-pitched whine filled the air, and suddenly the mist recoiled, the tendrils flinching back as though burned. "What is that?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Electromagnetic disruptor," he said, crouching beside me. "It'll keep it at bay for a while, but it won't last forever." I leaned back against the ice, trying to catch my breath. My mind was racing, 1,000 questions fighting for dominance. Finally, I managed to ask, "What is that thing?" What's down there? The man sighed, his expression grim. It's not just one thing, it's complicated. But the short version? It's not from here, and it's not supposed to be awake. Not from here, I repeated, struggling to process his words. You mean it's alien? He nodded. Alien, ancient, call it whatever you want. The people who built that dome, it wasn't to keep something out. It was to keep that thing in. I stared at him, my mind reeling. How do you know all this? Who are you? He hesitated, glancing toward the entrance of the crevasse, as if expecting the mist to break through at any moment. Then he said, I'm part of a team. What's left of it anyway? We monitor sites like this, make sure nothing escapes. Sites like this? I asked, incredulous. You mean there are more? He didn't answer, which was answer enough. And the notebook? I pressed. The photo, the coordinates? How did that end up in the cabin? He frowned. The notebook was never supposed to leave the facility. Someone must have taken it, tried to expose the truth. We've been looking for it ever since. Well, you found it, I said bitterly. A little too late, though, don't you think? Before he could respond, a loud crack echoed through the crevasse, followed by a deep, guttural roar. My blood turned to ice. What was that? I whispered. The man's face went pale. It's waking up, he said, his voice barely audible. We need to move. He grabbed my arm and pulled me to my feet, leading me deeper into the crevasse. The walls of ice glowed faintly, reflecting the pulsing light from the mist outside. The ground beneath us was uneven, forcing us to navigate carefully. As we moved, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. The hum had changed, becoming less of a sound and more of a presence. It felt like it was probing, searching for us. Where are we going? I asked, struggling to keep up. There's a backup facility nearby, he said. If we can get there, we might have a chance to contain it. Might? He didn't answer, which didn't exactly fill me with confidence. The crevasse widened into a narrow canyon, the wind whipping through it with a haunting wail. The man paused, scanning the area with his scanner. The device beeped faintly, and he nodded. This way, he said, leading me toward a hidden passage carved into the ice. The passage was barely wide enough for us to squeeze through, but it opened into a small cavern. To my surprise, the cavern wasn't natural. It was man-made. The walls were lined with panels of metal and circuitry, and a faint glow emanated from overhead lights embedded in the ceiling. What is this place, Mike? I asked, my voice echoing in the stillness. Outpost Gamma, he said, one of several monitoring stations around the perimeter of the containment site. He moved to a console on the far wall and began typing furiously. Screens flickered to life, displaying readings and maps I didn't understand. The disruptor at the crevasse entrance won't hold for long, he muttered. We need to activate the failsafe. Failsafe? A self-destruct mechanism, he said, his tone grim. If we can't contain it, we have to destroy it. The whole site, I stared at him, horrified. Destroy it? You mean the dome? The creature? Everything? He nodded. And us, if it comes to that. I opened my mouth to argue, but before I could say anything, the hum returned. Louder and more insistent than before, the screens on the console flickered, static crackling across them. It's found, the man said, his voice tight. The cavern trembled, chunks of ice falling from the ceiling. I could feel the presence growing stronger, pressing against the walls, seeping into the air. The man pulled a small device from his belt and handed it to me. If anything happens to me, you need to use this. What is it? A remote detonator, he said. If I can't activate the failsafe, you'll have to do it manually. My hands shook as I took the device. I don't even know what I'm doing here. I'm not qualified for this. You found the notebook, he said. You came all this way. Whether you like it or not, you're part of this now. Before I could respond, the walls of the cavern exploded inward, and the mist poured in, coiling and writhing like a living nightmare. The hum was deafening now, a relentless assault on my senses. The man raised his rifle and fired into the mist, the bullets having little effect. Go, he shouted, shoving me toward a side tunnel. I hesitated, torn between running and helping, but he didn't give me a choice. Run, he yelled again, his voice cutting through the chaos. Clutching the detonator, I turned and bolted down the tunnel, the sound of the battle fading behind me. My legs felt like lead, my breath coming in ragged gasps, but I didn't stop. The tunnel seemed endless, twisting and turning through the ice. I had no idea where I was going, but the further I got from the mist, the weaker the hum became. Finally, the tunnel opened into another cavern, this one larger and emptier than the last. At its center was a massive control panel, its lights flickering erratically. I approached it cautiously, the detonator still clutched in my hand. The console was covered in symbols and buttons I didn't recognize, but one stood out, a large red lever labeled failsafe. I hesitated, my mind racing. If I pulled it, I'd be sealing the fate of everything in this place, including the man who'd helped me. But if I didn't, a deep, guttural roar echoed through the tunnel behind me, and I knew I was out of time. Taking a deep breath, I reached for the lever. My fingers hovered over the lever as the roar from the tunnel grew louder, echoing through the icy cavern like the cry of some ancient beast. My instincts screamed at me to pull it, to end this madness before whatever was coming had the chance to break free. But something held me back, a nagging voice in the back of my mind. What if there was another way? What if pulling this lever destroyed more than just the dome and the creature beneath it? What if it wiped out answers I hadn't even begun to understand? The ground trembled beneath me, and I stumbled forward, catching myself on the console. The lights on the control panel flickered again, then steadied, as though the entire system was waking up, responding to the chaos outside. The hum in the air grew sharper, almost angry, and with it came a cold so intense it felt like it was slicing through my gear. Then the voice came back. "You don't understand." It wasn't words exactly, not something spoken aloud, but I could feel it pressing into my thoughts, urgent and relentless. Images flashed in my mind again, more vivid this time. I saw a great expanse of stars, constellations I didn't recognize, and a planet shrouded in mist. I saw structures made of light and energy, beings that didn't have form but radiated intelligence. And then I saw Earth, young, raw, untouched. The creature wasn't just alien, it was ancient, older than humanity, older than our concept of time. "What do you want from me?" I shouted, my voice echoing in the cavern. The images stopped abruptly, replaced by a single overwhelming sensation: despair. Whatever this thing was, it wasn't just waking up. It was trying to warn me. The roar from the tunnel snapped me back to reality. The mist was pouring into the cavern now, dark and writhing, its tendrils reaching for the console. I could feel its pull, the same hypnotic lure that had nearly stopped me in my tracks earlier. And then I saw him. The man, my guide, my reluctant ally, stumbled into the cavern, blood staining the front of his parka. He was clutching his rifle, but it hung uselessly at his side, its barrel twisted and scorched. His face was pale, his breath coming in sharp, shallow gasps. "They're not going to let us stop it," he rasped, collapsing against the wall. "What do you mean?" I asked, rushing to his side. He looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite place, fear mixed with something like pity. "The ones who built it, they didn't just trap it here. They left behind safeguards. If anyone tries to interfere..." He didn't need to finish. The mist was the safeguard, an ancient defense system designed to protect the containment unit at all costs. "Then what do we do?" I asked, my voice trembling. "If we can't destroy it, how do we stop it?" He shook his head, his gaze drifting to the console. "You're the one it's been talking to. You've seen what it wants you to see. Maybe there's another way." "Another way?" The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. I turned back to the console, my mind racing. The lever was still there, waiting for me to pull it, but now it felt like a last resort. The rest of the panel was a maze of buttons and switches, each labeled with strange symbols I couldn't decipher. And then, almost instinctively, I placed my hand on the console. The hum shifted instantly, becoming lower, calmer. The lights on the panel pulsed in response, and for a moment the mist seemed to hesitate. I closed my eyes, letting the vibrations flow through me. That's when I felt it. A connection. The console wasn't just a control panel. It was a bridge, a way to communicate with whatever intelligence had built this place. Images and sensations flooded my mind again, but this time they were clearer, more focused. I saw the dome from above, its intricate patterns glowing with power. I saw the creature beneath it, a mass of swirling energy contained within an elaborate web of light. And I saw the safeguards, the mist, spreading out like veins to protect the heart of the structure. It wasn't evil. It wasn't trying to harm me. It was afraid. The hum grew louder again, and I opened my eyes to see the mist advancing once more, its tendrils reaching for the man. He tried to stand, but his legs gave out beneath him. "No!" I shouted, stepping between him and the mist. "Stop!" To my surprise, it did. The tendrils froze mid-air, writhing in place as if confused. I turned back to the console, my mind racing. If this thing was alive, if it was aware, then maybe I could reason with it. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear bubbling in my chest. "Why are you here?" The hum shifted again, and the images returned. I saw the stars, the alien structures, the planet shrouded in mist. And then I saw destruction, worlds consumed by fire, civilizations reduced to ash. The creature hadn't been imprisoned because it was dangerous. It had been imprisoned because it was running from something worse. "You're hiding," I said aloud, the realization hitting me like a punch to the gut. "You're not trying to escape. You're trying to survive." The mist pulsed in response, and for the first time, I felt a sense of understanding. This thing, this ancient alien intelligence, wasn't our enemy. It was a refugee. But that didn't explain the safeguards, the violent reaction to our presence. Unless... "It's scared of us," the man said weakly, his voice barely above a whisper. I turned to him, my heart sinking. He was right. The creature wasn't just hiding from whatever had destroyed its world. It was hiding from us, from humanity. It had been here for millennia, undisturbed, until our curiosity led us to its doorstep. And now, it thought we were a threat. The hum grew louder, and the mist began to retreat, flowing back toward the tunnel. The tendrils coiled and twisted as they withdrew, and for a moment I thought we were safe. But then the ground trembled again, and a new sound filled the air, a deep, resonant rumble that seemed to come from the dome itself. "It's activating the failsafe," the man said, his eyes wide with fear. I stared at him, horrified. "But I thought—" "It's not for us," he interrupted. "It's for itself. If it thinks we're going to attack, it'll destroy everything, including itself." Panic surged through me as I turned back to the console. The lights were flashing wildly now, the symbols shifting and rearranging themselves faster than I could follow. "Stop!" I shouted, pressing my hand against the console again. "We're not here to hurt you." The hum wavered, and the images returned, this time of Earth. I saw the Arctic ice, the sprawling tundra, and the countless creatures that called this place home. I saw humanity, our cities and our machines, our endless curiosity. And then I saw the lever. It was a choice. The creature was giving me a choice. I could pull the lever, end it all, and ensure that this thing would never pose a threat to humanity. Or I could trust it, leave it be, and hope that it would do the same for us. My hand hovered over the lever once more, trembling with indecision. The weight of the moment pressed down on me, suffocating in its intensity. "Whatever you decide," the man said weakly, "do it fast. The failsafe is almost complete." I closed my eyes, taking a deep, shaky breath. This wasn't just about me or him or even the creature. It was about trust, about taking a leap of faith in something I didn't fully understand. When I opened my eyes, I made my choice. My hand moved, not to the lever, but to the console. The hum intensified, rattling through the cavern like a living heartbeat. The symbols on the control panel flared brighter, and for a split second, I thought I'd made the wrong decision. The mist froze mid-motion, coiling like a serpent ready to strike. But then everything stopped. The hum dropped to a low, resonant thrum that vibrated deep in my chest. The mist began to retreat, dissolving back into the tunnels like smoke sucked into a vacuum. The lights on the dome pulsed one final time before fading, leaving only the dim glow of the ice around us. The air felt lighter less oppressive, but the silence was deafening. "What did you do?" the man rasped, his voice barely above a whisper. "I told it." I paused, struggling to find the words. "I told it we weren't its enemy, that we were just trying to understand." He looked at me incredulous. "And you think it believed you?" "I don't know," I admitted, glancing back at the console. "But it stopped. That has to mean something, right?" The ground beneath us gave a sudden, violent lurch, and I stumbled, barely catching myself on the edge of the console. A deep rumble echoed through the cavern, louder than anything we'd heard before. "It's not over," the man said, his face pale. "Fail-safe or not, this thing wasn't meant to stay hidden forever. Something's coming." I opened my mouth to respond, but the rumble grew into a deafening roar. The ice above us groaned and cracked, and a shaft of blinding light pierced through, stabbing down into the heart of the cavern. I shielded my eyes, but the light was relentless, searing into every crevice and corner. "What is that?" I shouted, barely able to hear my own voice over the noise. The man didn't answer. He was staring up at the light, his face a mask of dread. "It's them!" "Them?" I demanded, panic rising in my chest. Before he could answer, a shadow passed through the light, massive, mechanical, and completely alien. The hum that had been so constant shifted again, this time into a piercing, mournful wail. The creature beneath the ice wasn't just responding to the light, it was crying out for help. "What is that thing?" I asked, my voice shaking. "It's not one of ours," the man said, gripping the wall for support. "Whatever it is, it's here to finish what they started." The light intensified, and the shadow descended further, revealing a massive structure that hovered just above the ice. It was sleek, angular, and bristling with technology I couldn't begin to understand. Panels on its surface shifted and rearranged themselves, emitting beams of energy that scanned the cavern. The creature beneath the dome responded with a surge of power. The ice cracked and split as the energy contained within it flared brighter than ever before. The ground beneath my feet felt like it was melting, and I staggered back, pulling the man with me. "We need to go," I shouted, but he shook his head. "There's nowhere to go," he said grimly. "We're in the middle of something we can't stop." The hovering structure emitted a sound, a deep, guttural tone that seemed to vibrate through the air. It wasn't a hum or a wail, it was a command. The mist that had retreated surged back, this time directed toward the structure. Tendrils of it lashed out, striking at the beams of energy, but the structure didn't falter. Instead, it retaliated. A burst of light shot out from the structure, slamming into the ice with the force of an earthquake. The cavern shook violently, and I was thrown to the ground, the air knocked from my lungs. Through the chaos, I could see the dome beneath the ice glowing brighter and brighter, its intricate patterns shifting like a living thing. The creature was fighting back. "It's trying to protect itself," I said, scrambling to my feet. "Or destroy itself," the man muttered. "If it thinks it can't win." The thought chilled me to my core. If the creature decided that survival was impossible, it might take everything with it. Us, the cavern, maybe even the entire Arctic region. I turned back to the console, desperate for a solution. The symbols were shifting rapidly now, almost too fast to follow, but one stood out, a single glyph that pulsed in a steady rhythm. It wasn't a command or a warning, it was a question. "Do you trust me?" I hesitated, my hand hovering over the console. The question wasn't just about me, it was about humanity, about whether we could put aside our fear and our instinct to destroy what we don't understand. The structure above us fired another burst of energy, and the cavern buckled under the force. The dome beneath the ice flared one last time, and the hum turned into a deafening roar. I didn't have a choice. I pressed my hand to the console and focused on the glyph, willing myself to believe that this wasn't the end. The light from the dome surged upward, colliding with the beams from the structure. The two forces clashed in a brilliant explosion of light and sound that shook the very foundations of the cavern. And then silence. When I opened my eyes, the light was gone. The structure had vanished, leaving only a faint shimmer in the air where it had been. The dome beneath the ice was dark, its patterns faded, but the hum remained, a low, steady vibration that felt almost peaceful. "What just happened?" the man asked, his voice barely audible. "I don't know," I admitted, my hand still resting on the console. But I think it's over. He stared at me for a long moment, then nodded. Let's hope you're right. We stood there in the silence, the weight of everything that had just happened pressing down on us. The cavern was still, the air strangely warm, and for the first time since we'd arrived, I felt a sense of calm. But as we turned to leave, a final thought crossed my mind. Whatever had just happened here, whatever we just witnessed, was only a small part of a much larger story. And somewhere out there, in the vastness of the universe, that story was still unfolding. As we stepped out of the cavern, the weight of the encounter still pressed heavily on my chest. The icy winds outside were a sharp contrast to the eerie warmth that had settled in the cavern below. But the air felt different, almost like it was holding its breath, waiting for something. We didn't say a word at first. The silence between us was heavy, charged with questions neither of us knew how to ask. I could still feel the faint hum in my bones, even though we were far from the dome. It wasn't intrusive, it was comforting, like a distant melody that refused to fade. The man stumbled ahead of me, his injuries slowing him down, but he refused my help every time I offered. I wasn't sure if it was pride or if he just didn't trust me yet. Either way, we both knew we couldn't stay here. We need to head back to the base, I said, breaking the silence. He stopped and turned to me, his face hard. You think there's a base to go back to after this? I blinked. What do you mean? He glanced over his shoulder, back toward the cavern entrance. That thing, whatever it is, do you really think the people funding this expedition don't already know about it? Do you think they're just going to let us walk out of here and tell the world what we saw? I opened my mouth to argue, but the look in his eyes stopped me. He wasn't being dramatic. He was terrified. You think they will come after us? I asked. They won't just come after us, he said. They'll erase us. The words sent a chill down my spine. It wasn't the first time I'd heard about covert operations going dark, about people disappearing when they got too close to something they weren't supposed to see. But I never thought I'd be one of those people. Then what do we do? I asked. He looked at me for a long moment, then said, We run. We barely had time to process his words before the ground beneath us trembled. It wasn't like the violent quakes in the cavern. It was subtle, almost like a warning. I turned back toward the entrance, my heart racing, and that's when I saw it. A faint glow pulsing through the ice. It wasn't coming from the cavern. It was coming from something beneath us. What the? Before I could finish, the glow intensified, spreading out in a web of intricate patterns that looked eerily similar to the ones on the dome. The ice beneath our feet cracked, thin lines spidering out in every direction. We need to move, the man shouted, grabbing my arm and pulling me away. We sprinted across the tundra, the glow chasing us like a living thing. The ice groaned and shifted beneath our boots, and I could feel the hum again, stronger this time. It wasn't just in my bones, it was in the air, in the ground, in everything around us. What's happening? I yelled over the roar of the wind. I don't know, he shouted back, but it's not stopping. The glow was everywhere now, lighting up the landscape in an otherworldly blue. It spread out in all directions, stretching toward the horizon, and then, as quickly as it had started, it stopped. We skidded to a halt, panting for breath, and turned back to look. The glow had receded, leaving the ice eerily still, but the patterns it had created, those intricate alien designs, were burned into the surface, etched into the ice like scars. What does it mean? I asked, my voice trembling. He didn't answer. He just stared at the patterns, his face pale, and then we heard it, a low, rumbling sound, growing louder by the second. It wasn't the hum this time. It was something else, something mechanical. Helicopters, the man said, his voice grim. I followed his gaze to the horizon, where dark shapes were emerging from the sky. They were coming fast, their rotors slicing through the air like knives. They found us, he said. I felt a surge of panic. We need to hide. There's nowhere to hide out here, he said, his tone resigned. They'll see us no matter where we go. I refused to accept that. There had to be a way out of this. And then I remembered the notebook. I fumbled through my pack, pulling it out with shaking hands. The pages were worn and faded, but the map inside was still clear. I scanned it quickly, searching for anything that could give us an edge. There, I pointed to a spot on the map, a cluster of jagged lines marked with a symbol I didn't recognize. "What is that?" he asked. "I don't know," I admitted, "but it's our only chance." He hesitated for only a moment before nodding. "Then let's go." We took off again, our legs burning as we pushed through the snow. The helicopters were closing in, their searchlights cutting through the darkness. I could feel the panic rising in my chest, but I forced myself to focus on the map, on the coordinates that promised a slim chance of escape. As we ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being herded, like prey. The helicopters weren't just searching for us, they were steering us, pushing us towards something. And then I saw it, a massive fissure in the ice, stretching deep into the earth. The edges were jagged and sharp, and a faint glow emanated from within. It looked like the kind of place no sane person would ever go. "Are you sure about this?" the man asked, his voice laced with doubt. "No," I admitted. "But do we have a choice?" He didn't answer. Instead, he grabbed my hand, and together, we jumped. The fall was longer than I expected, the icy walls rushing past us in a blur. When we finally hit the ground, it was softer than I anticipated, snow and ice cushioning our landing. I looked up, my breath catching in my throat. We weren't in just any fissure. We were in another cavern, even larger than the one we'd left behind. But this one was different. The walls were lined with structures, towers and spires made of the same glowing material as the dome. And in the center of it all was another console, larger and more elaborate than the one above. "This is it," the man said, his voice filled with awe. I didn't respond. I was too busy staring at the center of the cavern, where a massive shape was suspended in the air, encased in a shimmering field of light. It wasn't just alive, it was waiting. I stood there, frozen in place, staring up at the colossal shape hovering in the middle of the cavern. It was unlike anything I'd ever seen, its surface smooth and black, reflecting the faint glow of the structures around it. The shimmering field of light encasing it seemed to ripple and pulse, almost as if it were breathing. The man stepped forward cautiously, his eyes locked on the object. This isn't just technology," he whispered. "It's something else entirely." "What do you mean?" I asked, my voice shaky. He didn't answer. Instead, he reached out toward the console in the center of the room, his hand trembling. As his fingers hovered over it, the symbols on its surface flared to life, casting the cavern in a brilliant blue light. And then it spoke. Not in words, not in any language I could understand, but in emotions, in sensations that flooded my mind all at once. Fear, desperation, hope. I stumbled back, clutching my head as the torrent of feelings overwhelmed me. "What is it doing?" I gasped. "It's trying to communicate," the man said, his voice tight. "It's showing us what it feels, what it's been through." Images began to form in my mind, vivid and clear. A planet, vibrant and teeming with life. Towers that stretched into the skies, much like the structures around us. Beings of light, moving through their world with grace and purpose. And then came the destruction. Flashes of fire and chaos, of machines tearing through their cities. A shadow consuming everything in its path. The beings of light fought back, their technology and willpower unmatched. But it wasn't enough. The last thing I saw before the vision ended was the object, the very one now floating before us, being sent away, hurled into the depths of space as a desperate last measure. I opened my eyes, my breathing ragged. The cavern seemed to spin around me as I tried to process what I'd just seen. "They sent it here," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. "To escape, to hide. And now we've found it," the man said grimly. The shimmering field around the object began to flicker, and the hum returned, louder than ever. The ground beneath us shook, and cracks began to form in the ice walls. "We've triggered something," he said, backing away from the console. I looked up at the object, my heart pounding. "It's waking up." The symbols on the console shifted rapidly, their glow intensifying. The hum grew deeper, vibrating through the air like a drumbeat. And then with a deafening crack, the field of light surrounding the object shattered. The force of the release sent us both flying back, slamming into the icy walls. I groaned, my vision blurred as I tried to pull myself to my feet. When I looked up, the object was descending, its smooth surface shifting and reconfiguring as it moved. "What is it doing?" I shouted over the roar of the hum. It's preparing," the man said, his eyes wide with a mix of awe and terror. "Preparing for what?" Before he could answer, the cavern was flooded with light. Not the cold, mechanical glow of the structures, but a warm, golden radiance that seemed to emanate from the object itself. The light wrapped around us, and for a moment everything went still. I felt a presence in my mind again. But this time, it wasn't emotions or images. It was words, clear, deliberate, and unmistakable. "The enemy is near. We must act." I gasped, my heart racing. "The enemy? What enemy?" The object didn't respond. Instead, the light around it pulsed, sending waves of energy through the cavern. The structures lining the walls began to shift and come to life, their surfaces glowing with the same golden light. The man grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the console. "We need to figure out what it wants." As we approached, the symbols on the console shifted again, forming patterns that seemed almost familiar. My mind raced, trying to make sense of them. And then it clicked. "It's coordinates," I said, my fingers tracing the symbols. "It's pointing to something." "Something where?" I looked at him, my stomach sinking. "Above us. It's pointing to the surface." The ground shook violently, and a deafening roar filled the cavern. The structures around us began to crumble, and I could see beams of light shooting up through the ice, piercing the surface above. "They're coming," the man said, his voice tight with fear. "Who's coming?" "The same ones that destroyed their world," he said, his gaze locked on the object. "They followed it here." The light from the object pulsed again, and I felt the presence in my mind one more time. "You must decide, fight or flee." The words sent a shiver down my spine. Fight? Against what? And how? But before I could answer, the ice above us shattered and the sky opened up. Dark shapes descended from the clouds, massive, ominous machines that dwarfed even the object in the cavern. They moved with precision, their surfaces bristling with weapons and glowing red lights. The man grabbed my shoulder, pulling me toward the fissure we'd come through. "We can't stay here. They'll destroy everything." I hesitated, looking back at the object. It pulsed with light, its surface shifting as if it were alive. I could feel its presence in my mind, urging me to act. "Help us." I turned to the man. "We can't just run. We have to do something." "What can we do?" he shouted, panic in his voice. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that this wasn't just their fight anymore. It was ours too. The hum grew louder, the light from the object intensifying as the first of the machines descended into the cavern. And I made my choice. The cavern exploded into chaos. The first machine crashed through the icy walls, its metal limbs digging into the frozen ground with precision. It moved like a predator, every motion fluid yet deliberate. Red beams of light scanned the cavern, painting the walls in eerie crimson streaks. The hum from the ancient object surged, and the light pulsing from its surface became blinding. The structures around us, now fully alive, began to shift and reshape. Spires stretched upward, forming a protective barrier between us and the invading machines. I could feel the object urging me forward, its presence in my mind stronger than ever. The words echoed again. "Help us." "What do you want me to do?" I shouted, my voice barely audible over the roar of collapsing ice and mechanical screeches. The console lit up, its symbols rearranging into patterns I could almost understand. The knowledge wasn't mine. It was being fed to me, directly into my thoughts. My hands moved on instinct, pressing the glowing symbols in a sequence that felt both foreign and familiar. Behind me, the man grabbed my arm. "What are you doing?" "I don't know," I admitted, my fingers still moving. "But I think it's fighting back." The object responded to my actions. Its surface rippled like liquid, and a deep, resonating tone filled the cavern. The tone wasn't just sound, it was a force vibrating through the air and shaking the ground beneath us. The first machine reeled back, its red lights flickering as if the tone disrupted its systems. But more were descending, their sheer numbers overwhelming. "We can't hold them off forever," the man yelled. I turned to him, desperation in my voice. "We don't have to. We just need to give it time." "Time for what?" As if in answer, the object pulsed again, sending out a wave of golden energy. The wave slammed into the machines, knocking several of them off balance. The ground beneath them cracked, and fissures spread outward, swallowing their massive forms into the icy depths. But for every machine that fell, two more took its place. "We're going to die here," the man muttered, his eyes wide with fear. "No," I said firmly, gripping his shoulder. "Not if we finish this." I turned back to the console, the symbols rearranging faster now, almost too quickly for me to follow. My hands trembled as I pressed the glowing patterns, each one triggering a response from the object. The cavern shifted around us, the ancient structures coming to life in ways I couldn't have imagined. Spires transformed into weapons, firing beams of golden light at the descending machines. Platforms rose from the ground, shielding us from the onslaught. The object itself began to rise, its surface glowing brighter than ever. I could feel its presence in my mind, not as a demand, but as a partnership. It wasn't just asking for my help, it was offering me its strength. "You're linked to it," the man said, his voice a mix of awe and disbelief. "You're controlling it." "I'm not controlling anything," I said. "It's guiding me." A deafening roar filled the air as one of the larger machines broke through the defenses, its massive limbs crushing the spires in its path. Its red lights locked onto the object, and a high-pitched whine signaled the charging of its weapon. "Get down!" the man shouted, pulling me behind a pillar of ice. The machine fired, a searing beam of energy that struck the object head-on. The force of the impact shook the entire cavern, and for a moment I thought it was over. But the object didn't shatter. Instead, it absorbed the energy, its glow intensifying to an almost blinding level. The hum grew louder, deeper, resonating in a way that felt alive. And then it struck back. A massive wave of golden light erupted from the object, sweeping through the cavern like a tidal wave. The machines didn't stand a chance. Their metallic forms were torn apart, disintegrating into nothingness as the wave passed through them. The cavern fell silent, the only sound the faint crackle of ice settling. I staggered to my feet, my body trembling from the sheer energy that had passed through me. The man was beside me, his face pale but alive. "Is it over?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I looked up at the object, now hovering silently in the center of the cavern. Its glow had dimmed, but the hum remained, a steady rhythmic pulse that felt almost like a heartbeat. "I don't know," I admitted. As if in response, the object lowered itself back to the ground, its surface rippling one last time before going still. The console flickered and the symbols faded into darkness. The presence in my mind was gone, leaving an emptiness that felt almost like grief. "What happens now?" the man asked, his voice breaking the heavy silence. I turned to him, clutching the notebook tightly in my hands. "We make sure this doesn't fall into the wrong hands." He frowned. "Do you think they'll stop looking for it?" "No," I said, my voice firm, "but they'll have to go through me first." The man studied me for a long moment, then nodded. "Then let's get out of here." We climbed back up through the fissure, the sky above us a pale, cold gray. The helicopters were gone, the threat seemingly neutralized for now. But as we trekked across the tundra, I couldn't shake the feeling that this wasn't the end. The object had saved us, but its message had been clear. The enemy wasn't just coming. They were already here. Was the object truly a relic of a forgotten civilization? Or is it something far more powerful and dangerous than we could ever understand? And if the enemy has already arrived, are we prepared for what's coming next?